one more. Hooray! Welcome back.
Good to see you.
Thank you. It is good to see you. You look good.
Got your hair different, you look good.
Do I? Oh, I can have it clipped back, right? Thank you.
I thought you were going for the Monique, if I look good, then I will feel better, maybe.
Yes.
That's my strategy in life.
And also, you help us establish quorum, so.
Or else I was gonna start crying for Chris in a minute, like,
That's the important part.
Absolutely.
All right.
We're just glad to see you.
Okay.
Nice to see you too. Never been so happy to be back at work, right?
I bet.
Okay. 1 minute. Stop.
Did you all have a good New Year's?
I can't even remember.
It's kind of like my
I
New
was
Year
like-
right now.
I was
I'm
like,
like,
what?
reset. Was there a January?
I mean, oof.
All right. So we are waiting on Mr. Hershey, but we do have a quorum, so we can go ahead and get started. I will gavel us in if we're ready. All right. All right, welcome everyone. We do have a quorum present. I believe we'll have some more members joining us as the work session proceeds. This is our February 6th work session of the Wake County Board of Education. The first thing we have on our agenda today is a presentation from the Audit Committee and the selection of a new Audit Committee member. Ms. Posey, I believe you'll be driving this presentation?
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Chair Haggerty, respected board members. So our presentation today, we have our guest. We'll start with the chair first, Charles Coble. He is our chair of the Audit Committee. He serves as an attorney with Brooks Pierce and is a long-term Audit Committee member. And then you all met Ms. Faith Bynum Patterson. She's the vice chair. She's a CPA and a business owner of her firm. So our background for today's desired outcomes include just a little information, reminders about the board's audit committee, the policy 8810 that the board established in 2026, and then we will go to the recommendation to fill a vacancy on the committee. The policy was adopted in 2006. We previously shared with you that the school system is one of the only school systems in North Carolina to have an audit committee. And so that is unique for school systems. The purpose of the audit committee, as established in the board policy, is to assist the board in the process of procuring an independent audit firm. Go to the next slide. Reviewing the audit of the financial statements before presenting them to the board, and assisting in obtaining effective corrective action and necessary improvement based on audit findings and recommendations received from the external auditors. The policy directs the board to nominate members of the committee with a strong financial management or related background. The current membership of the committee represents that, and there is also one attorney. There are 6 voting members from the community not employed by the school district or having any direct or indirect business dealings with the school district. The Board of Education members will nominate individuals, and the board as a whole will vote to select the committee. Board members are encouraged to select professionals with a background in accounting, finance, business, I think that's supposed to be business management, consulting, or law. Any questions about that process? Because we are coming to you with a recommendation. All right?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Evans.
My one question when I reviewed this before the meeting today was to ask, is there any intent to have, of the members that we select, to have somewhat level representation aligned with the school districts, with our board districts?
Not necessarily, because with 9 of us and then 6 members that we approve, it would be hard to rotate. Generally, so long as they're not all clustered from one neighborhood or municipality.
Do we check that?
I don't know that anyone has, Ms. Posey.
Expertise is good.
They're generally, it's members of the community and businesses.
Right.
So it's not been specific to related districts now.
Okay.
All right. So we have a vacancy on the board. This is related to a member that just has not participated for a couple years. And so basically we have taken that as they had vacated their seat and are bringing forward a recommendation. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Coble and Ms. I wouldn't call you Faith because you're always calling me by first name.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I'll start us off. Again, I'm Charles Coble, Chair of the Audit Committee and an attorney with Brooks Pierce. I've met some of you before, but not all of the members of the board, so hello to those of you that I've not met in person before. Mr. Taylor, you as well. My wife and I both grew up in the school system in Wake County, as both of our daughters have gone through too. So to have an opportunity, I want to thank you for the opportunity to serve in this capacity, and I've enjoyed doing so for several years. As Ms. Posey said, we have an opening, and previous chair, Laird Hepburn, he brought to us a candidate for that vacancy. His name is Nathaniel or Nate Branscombe. His resume, I believe, was part of the board materials. He is a CPA, so he would bring further accounting expertise to the board, and has a background not just in the large auditing companies like KPMG and Ernst & Young, but also has worked in businesses as well. I was going to turn it over briefly to Ms. Patterson, to herself being a CPA, to comment on how his expertise could complement hers.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and it is a pleasure to see you all again. One of the things about Mr. Branscombe that stood out for me, because all CPAs are not created the same, right? I know from my background, it is more on the financial reporting side, but one piece for Mr. Branscombe is that he also has audit experience. So as we are going through and with any RFP and really getting into the nuts and bolts of what should also an audit firm bring, I think that his experience there will be very helpful, because that is something that is very specific. Just because you learn it on a CPA exam is nothing like the practicality of the experience. And so I think along with his financial reporting experience, he also has a bit of finance in there too. Coupled with his audit experience, I really think that he would be a great complement to our audit committee.
And he's demonstrated interest in wanting to serve too, which is
Yes, he
important.
has.
We need another engaged and active member.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So with that, if there are questions, happy to field any questions that you have. But from the audit committee standpoint, our recommendation is that you appoint Mr. Branscombe to fill the vacancy that we have.
Right. Thank you. If there's anything else on the presentation, we'll open up for questions from the board. All right. Ms. Caulfield, you had a question?
Just a quick question. I noticed that he's worked with some pretty big companies, but not schools. Do we typically have somebody that works with schools, or is that not necessarily?
No, we do not. The purpose of when the 8810 was created, it was more to look at community members who had a background in CPA, because financial auditing, these are financial statements, and so they come with a different perspective. You already have an external audit firm that is independent and comes in and audits the records. This was to bring in more community involvement, as well as, you have a legal side that's not necessarily brought in by external auditors.
Any other questions from board members? Either about the audit committee or about Mr. Branscombe? All right, then. So I believe we'll have the recommendation that will come to the agenda for action. All right.
Sounds like I'm staying here a little bit longer tonight.
That is all right. We'll give us time to text Mr.
Sure you don't
Branscombe and let him know what
wanna
he's
move
getting
that
into. So. All right.
All righty, thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Posey. Thank you. Right. So the next item on our agenda, we've been discussing at some previous meetings, work sessions, and then tried to reach out to you all individually about our legislative agenda for 2024. So as you know, you were all members when we had come on to the board in 2023. We developed a legislative agenda that we could take to the state legislature and even potentially use with other local government officials that identified our main priorities. And the legislature met throughout 2023. They are currently in recess. They will begin their short session of the legislature on, of all things, Valentine's Day, February 14th of 2024.
Bringing in the love.
Bringing the love. So what we'll do is, this is an opportunity for us to review the agenda we adopted, make any changes that are necessary, and then if we're prepared to adopt it, then we can share this with our new lobbying team, who I hope you'll get a chance to meet at our upcoming board retreat. And they can talk to us about what the legislature is projecting for revenue this year, how active or hurried they might be. Some years they might take up a lot of issues, other years they might try to rush to get ahead. Sometimes with elections they want to keep it short so everyone can get out of Raleigh and go back home. But you never know what will come up and what might keep them in Raleigh. An important point is that one of the things we try to do with the legislative agenda is be proactive and looking at things that we would like to do affirmatively, but then there's always the chance that something might come up that we haven't expected. And so throughout the year, we may have to respond to issues which aren't in the agenda, which we might not have even contemplated would be coming before the legislature, but which we might have a firm opinion, a collective opinion as a board on. So we've tried to share a number of documents with you. Melissa has uploaded these into Assembly. Everyone should have, at the very least, a copy of the 2023 agenda. And then what we've tried to do is share some updated agendas for some, what I'll call allied or affiliated organizations, like the Professional Association for State Superintendents. Also, the State Board of Education has a legislative agenda. The Department of Public Instruction has a legislative agenda. And of course, our state association, the North Carolina School Board Association. So we've shared these agendas with you, and then you see what we have already. I hope you've noticed there's a lot of overlap, that most of these organizations around the state are interested in things like compensation for our workers, for our teachers, our certified professionals, and then our other employees that are not certified teachers, like our cafeteria workers, our bus drivers, school nurses. you'll see that, most of these address flexibility for school calendars and trying to give local districts a little bit more control over how they set their calendars. We have put a big focus on this. Not everyone has looked at this as in-depth as we have, but the K-3 class sizes and trying to get some sort of local option for a waiver, because we see in Wake County how much this costs us, and it costs the state money too. I think in a few years ago, last year, Johnson Hospital, I don't know if you can remember which year, but we looked at it, and just in western Wake County alone, waivers for these K-3 class size limits, if we could put reasonable ones into effect, would be like building 4 new elementary schools. That's, 4 elementary schools we don't have the money for right now, where we have to take those kids and
Or land.
take them, and the land, to put the school on in the first place. And we have to take those kids and move them further and further from their neighborhoods and their houses until we can get to a school with available seats. So I don't want to read the materials that I've given you back to you. Instead, I'm going to trust that everyone's had a chance to look at them. If we use our legislative agenda as the model to start with, we'll of course update the year, we'll update the Board of Education membership. We will formally, we're planning to take a vote on this after we've selected a new District 4 representative, so we should be able to update that as well. Beyond that, we have a high-quality workforce group of issues, a student well-being group of issues, student outcomes, and then legislative support. So I will just open it up for open discussion. What do people like? Is there anything you don't like? Is there anything you would want to change or modify? Ms. Evans?
Thanks. So the first thing that we had very serious concern last year with a conversation at the legislature about capping class size in grades 4th and 5th. And the fact we do have the K-3 waiver, existing in our current legislative agenda, but I wondered if we didn't want to broaden this point to communicate, something along the lines that any further capping has absolutely must come with the appropriate funding.
Okay. So we want to tie funding to the K-3 class size, and then also, would you like to put a cautionary language in there about grades 4 and 5? Okay, I think we can do that.
When they did the K-3 class size, I forget what year it was, 2017-ish, it did not come with any state funding to support that and caused a lot of chaos. Class size chaos was actually a trending framing of that at the time. And I think 4th and 5th classrooms across the state ballooned because districts were forced to make the K-3 class size mandate work. And so our 4th and 5th grades got larger, which is not necessarily good for students.
So let's talk
right?
about that, right? Say a school building only has 24 classrooms, right? And you've divided it 4 per each grade level, K through 5. But now, because you have to create more classrooms for K-3, say instead of 4 classrooms, they each have 5 classrooms. You're not adding new classrooms to the building, so you have to cram more 4th and 5th graders into fewer remaining classrooms. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so there wasn't funding for new school construction, but you also said it came without funding. What other kind of funding what else, other kind of funding needs did we have created from this?
There wasn't funding for the additional teachers that would be needed.
That's right.
Or classroom assistants in some cases. So I think all of that needs to be encompassed in this point. And I couldn't find, I did look at all of the other samples, well, they're not samples, but all of the other legislative agendas that were attached with our materials. And the closest thing that I could find related to this is a guiding principle. It's the second point on the School Board Association page. Their point number 2 regarding that as a general position, they object to any legislation that requires LEAs to, fund the mandate. I can pull up the wording, and I was just trying to pull up to see perhaps what Durham Public Schools or one of our other larger districts, if they had addressed this at all, but I'm working on that.
So it's an interesting question because I brought this up with our state association. And the staff had originally thought that this would really only be a concern for larger districts. Maybe thought larger districts should be the one to take the lead on it. But when I brought it up at the meeting, I actually got a lot of feedback from boards from like Clay and Cherokee counties and very small school districts, because for them, that pressure to find more teachers for the same number of students became a real burden because they were already having difficulty filling the positions they had. And if you want to get the best, highest qualified teachers, in a lot of parts of the state, you're going to have a smaller pool. And then when you increase the number you need, even though you haven't increased the number of kids, they said that was making it much harder on them. They had classes where they had to teach with substitutes until they could find someone for those positions. So even though we tend to think of it as a growth issue for the big districts, it impacts the small districts as well. Yeah. Were you able to find anything while I was stalling for time?
Well, no, not directly to this from other districts, but I can read the point. The School Boards Association, under the guiding principles, point number 2, opposes any legislation that would require school systems to expend additional financial resources without the state providing those necessary resources. So that's the most aligned thing, at least on that document. But I'll keep looking as others.
Just real quick, is everyone, before we move on from the point, is everyone sort of in agreement with that we'd like to put that in?
My only
Ms. Johnson?
concern is that we will be different from small districts in a fine point of funding isn't just that simple, because, again, I can't remember if it was 4 or 6 elementary, so I'm going to go with 4, but it isn't just money. We can't actually keep building schools where the growth is. There is no way to do that. So we do have a different, finer point that I think just, again, we tend to use very simplistic language when our issues aren't simple. And I think for Wake County, we have to be very clear that currently where our growth sits, there is nowhere to build 4 new schools or 6 new schools. And we certainly don't want to go back to taking away our specials classrooms, which we've done in the past. So I think, I mean, my personal opinions are our legislative government affairs people can help us with the language, but I do think it's important, because this board was not at that table then, that yes, it's cost for teachers, but it also is a problem for us because we don't have a place to put visible new space.
Right.
So I think they can help us frame that, but.
So if I could share this, I think you all are hitting in all the right areas. The big issue for the larger districts was the size and the space, and so the funding for the positions are there. So when they decreased the class size or kept that mandate, they gave the extra teachers that went along with that. What we had to come back and say to the General Assembly was about the special teachers, because they didn't put the funding in for that, and I think they came the subsequent year after that and began to add that back in. So from that perspective, you have kind of the funding taken care of, but it is the spacing needs. When we think about that elementary school, not only do you expand the number of K-3, reduce the number of 4 and above, but those special teachers are often displaced as well.
They were cart on a cart.
Cart on cart. And so depending on the district, smaller districts, rural districts, they had the problems that the chair talked about. And then some smaller districts that had consolidated schools. Take a Jones County that has a K-12 building. Well, if they now have that mandate, there's no way else to expand. There's one school in one district. And so I think you captured all the right things. I think the idea should be, as you talked about, having waiver flexibility for districts like Wake County. And I know that's where you put your efforts. And so I think you're on track with that.
Right. Additional thoughts on class size, Dr. A?
Yeah, so I think, that waiver, whatever formula that may be involved in that should take into account, like space and availability of land, and, whether even expansion is even possible, right? I mean, that's where we kind of get into the problems. So, yeah.
So I'm going to incorporate all of these notes. My plan would be, within 2 weeks for our next work session, to bring a draft back to you. We can wordsmith maybe that draft a little bit, but then, unless there's a lot of debate, then we would go ahead and put it on action for our February 20th meeting. We'll have the legislative, the government relations team that you'll meet at the retreat. They'll be able to come back and offer specific tweaks to it. But what I'd really like to do is have voting on just like the spirit of the issues, rather than us being copy editors and, vetoing every word. So then, if we agree on the issues, and the lobbyists say, well, you should maybe use this word versus that word, or something like that, then we can just review it. And it's not that we have to, because, for example, sometimes they might want to put things on a one-page sheet or in a communication, and, we shouldn't be having to edit each one of those. But so long as we're in agreement with these main issues, this will be our guiding document. Okay. Dr. Ing?
I just also just kind of want to bring attention to under the student outcomes, the fully fund needs of students with disabilities.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to somehow expand that to be a little bit more teeth into it. I think, obviously, the needs of students with disabilities vary, and the cost of educating the students are vastly different depending on the level of disabilities.
So one of the agendas, I don't know if you saw it, talks about one of the reforms. I saw it in two places. One of them talked about simply changing the funding per student. There's a cap on how many of your students can be classified as a special education student. But then there's a dollar amount that you get per student. But then there was another agenda that I think gets to what you're saying, which was to, rather than group all students together, stratify them by need, because if some students are going to require much more intensive assistance, then they should get more funding for that, whereas other students may come with an identification, but maybe are integrated in the classroom, have done a great job of working and learning with that that situation. So if I can find a language on that, how do people feel about fleshing that out a little bit and being a little more specific? That we're not just talking about fully fund, but differentiating based on specific diagnoses or family diagnoses. Okay. You have a question? What do you think?
Comment maybe. My
Okay.
only struggle with that is when it comes, I've had some families talk to me about the difficulty of the testing.
Yeah.
And then when it comes back, they don't necessarily have the same evaluation. So I worry that then families might get stuck between spaces. So if there's a way to clarify so that do you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
the child wouldn't get lost. Well, they don't fit into this category, so they can't get that. They don't fit in that funding. Do you know what I mean by that?
I think that might be something we could work on internally,
Yeah.
like with identification process and practice, and then what parents' rights of appeal are if they get an evaluation they don't agree with. Dr. Taylor, do you have thoughts on that?
So in some rare instances, you may have a student that can qualify for multiple categories. And so based on that IEP team, they're going to select the appropriate category. Then it really is about making sure the services are in place that are needed. If a student is kind of caught in between and not performing where they need to be, that absolutely is a discussion that has to take place during the IEP meeting, where that parent is going to give feedback about whether or not they see the IEP as effective. But in terms of identification, I would say that if there's an issue that a parent has, it really does take place during the identification period. And so we can look to see if there are some issues out there that we need to look at, see if that needs to be added to the language. But kind of what I see is I think you guys are certainly on the right track. The idea is about not only expanding the 13.5% in terms of the cap of the funding, but but making sure there's a clear delineation of higher need students having a different funding formula attached to them. Now, my understanding is that in Wake, we have a higher number of higher need students, and that puts us at a disadvantage when it comes to the head. Am I correct in that thinking? I think that's our situation, right?
That's what we've heard, that it's like if the dollars in the formula are based on an average need, we have more students that require more than the average.
So I'll circle back with Jill McKenna and see if there's any language that we need to add to help you all craft that better if we need to.
I'll share this. This is from the North Carolina Association of School Administrators. And what they put in theirs was to revise and enhance state funding for children with disabilities above the current 13% state funding cap and implement a new weighted funding formula developed by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction reflecting differentiated costs of supporting students with special needs. So if you think that captures it, we could try to like mirror their language. We could probably get more information from DPI about that funding, weighted funding they're proposing. Okay.
That's the only place I saw it. At least in the attachments that we were sent, that was the only place that I saw that weighted funding formula
Yeah.
mentioned.
All right.
Is that the one from the School Boards Association?
No, the Association of Administrators.
Okay. NCAS.
Yeah.
Catherine Joyce is correct.
Yours, Dr. Taylor. That group.
One of
Yes.
All right. Any other questions about anything else in the proposed agenda? Suggestions, ideas? Got one, Ms. Caulfield?
Yeah. And I apologize if I kind of doing a little bit of catch-up here, but I know we've had meetings with the Restart and how effective they've been in some of our schools. And the state is the one who controls that, correct? So is it possible that we can go to them and ask for more flexibility in schools? Like, why do they have to actually, my question, why do they have to fail in order to get that flexibility to give them the advantage? Why can't we be more proactive and have accountability, you know, at the school level,
Yeah.
but allow our schools to have more flexibility?
So what would you think about this language? Provide all public schools with the needed flexibility like that of Restart schools and charter schools to include increased authority over their calendar, budget, and personnel.
And which one is that in?
That one is also in the
Yeah.
Association
Oh.
of School Administrators.
Do I not have that open? I couldn't tell.
So
It's
that
one of
one,
the-
that one was one Dr. Taylor had emailed, yeah. So, yeah, that hasn't been something we've asked for before, but, I mean, if we have support for it, I think definitely benefit our schools. Anyone see a downside or anyone object to that? Okay.
No, because the only place we ask for flexibility is on school calendar, but we really want flexibility with funding. It goes way beyond school calendar.
Yep. I mean, some have more ESL needs, some
Right.
have more special needs, so
Okay.
it just really helps them. And it actually fits into, on our agenda, it fits into quite a few categories there. Student outcomes, student well-being,
Yeah.
quality.
All right.
Ms.
Well,
Posey has something she wanted to share as well.
go ahead.
So, I know that David's been covering a lot of the budget development process, and Ms. Kinsey would often share with me that we do utilize the lapsed salaries to balance the district budget. We do currently have flexibility within our allotments to do a model restart with all schools, but we do not have the financial capacity to do so because we already utilize those funds to balance our budget. So just wanted to share that with you. Schools do have transfer flexibility with the allotments they do receive to make decisions, but they do not gain those lapsed salaries the way that we provide for Restart.
I'm glad you spoke, because my memory was very clear that we did not articulate it that way because of how we currently budget. But since Dave wasn't here, I didn't have the memory to say why we were very much so. The place that we have zero flexibility is the calendar for schools that are not Restart. But thank you for helping me be like, no, that actually was in my head for a reason.
So then what all do you think they might be envisioning with the Association of School Administrators language? Are they looking at something else?
So ultimately, what they're talking about is having, and we characterize it as charter-like flexibility. And so there are certain things that we can do with the flexibility that Trish talked about, but that complete school districts just don't have. And so they put a number of limits on categories. Take, for example, 027, or teacher assistants. That association has now lobbied to where you can't transfer money out of that. So districts often make the decision, if we need additional classroom teachers, and we'll sacrifice and have less TAs. That flexibility and transferability was taken away. And so within some areas, we do have the opportunity to be flexible, but we don't have complete flexibility. And that's really what it's about, giving us the same opportunity to do what charters do. And that's just happening. So that's what they're talking about.
And that charter flexibility is similar to the restart flexibility, Ms. Caulfield, that you were looking at as a model. Is that, you
Yeah.
understand? Okay. Great. Great. All right. All right, so Sam, it's up to you. Final thoughts and questions?
Thank you for talking about the calendar flexibility.
We appreciate it. I'll give you a minute to get caught up. We're just basically, we've gone through the Wake County calendar, or the Wake County legislative agenda, reviewed what we had last year. We've had a couple of thoughts about adding some more specificity to the capping, the class size limits language, talking about grades 4 and 5. We've talked about, under student outcomes, giving a little more specificity with our discussion of funding the students with disabilities and special education, and really trying to differentiate funding by need of the different students. And then we were just talking about trying to provide all public schools with the needed flexibility similar to the restart schools or the charter schools. And the debate was, well, we do have budget flexibility, but we don't have the same level, it sounds like, that we see in charters and with the restart schools. And so it's sort of a, how can we sort of level the playing field and give, our administrators and our principals the same sort of creativity and options to address the problems they see in their schools.
So are we debating?
So really, we're just, the plan is that we're just looking at what we have, getting suggestions for things that I'll bring back at the next meeting. Again, it's not so much trying to copy edit everything, but just look at the big issues. And then if we're all in agreement with it in work session on the 20th, we'll bring it to action on the 20th. And then we would also have our government relations team review it in advance for the retreat, and then be able to bring back their suggestions and their outlook on these issues.
Great.
Great. All right. But it does sound like we may have come to the end of discussion, unless anyone has anything else, any further thoughts. Okay. We're going to alternate, so I'm going to go to Ms. Edmonds, and then we'll come back.
So I have a big one. I want to be bold because we are Wake County, and I want to join the more than 25 school districts across the state that are opposing private school vouchers, because I believe it's going to overall harm public school funding, and I want us to put that in here.
Okay. Do you have specific wording? Is it all public school vouchers? Is it the opportunity scholarships? What's the scope on where you want to go?
I'm speaking about you can call it what the state calls it, opportunity scholarships, whatever, but they have just lifted the cap on income eligibility. So we now have universal private school vouchers. Those are the ones I'm talking about.
Okay, so it's opposition to removal of the cap on...
No.
Okay.
I want to join the governor and call for a moratorium on them is what I really want to do. But there are school boards across the district that have done it through resolution. I don't know that they have then put it in their legislative agendas as well. but I think it belongs in our legislative agenda, and I do not have that wording today. I was
Okay.
anticipating that we had time to develop that.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get, was just some sort of, like, suggestions on the wording, so we'd know, we could at least talk about it today and get, like, the scope of it, you know, because there's a big range there, and just making sure we had something that we were, you know, all, you know, we could come to some agreement on.
So, Mr. Chair, if you'd like, we can work with the lobbyists in crafting some language. I did have that on the list as opportunity scholarships, the bridge funding, because there hasn't been any bridge funding put in place. If a student is funded, it's taken away from the LEA. Well, the difference is that if a student is in an LEA or PSU, it goes to a charter or private school. I can understand the funding going within, but if your child has been in private school all along, and now when they take advantage of that scholarship, that can impact the district. They lose money that they never had. So that's the bridge funding piece that's not in place. And so we can get with them to see what kind of language they would want to craft to reflect what the board is asking.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Any further thoughts on that, or Dr. Ng, and then we'll, Ms. Caulfield, unless you have, because is your issue a different issue? Oh, okay. Well, then we'll hear from you after Dr. Ng.
Okay.
And then after we've finished talking about the financial, the vouchers, then we'll move on to the new issue. All right, Dr. Ng.
Well, I kind of like the language that's in the NCASA regarding increased accountability and transparency of the Opportunity Scholarship Program to ensure private schools receiving funds through this program are improving outcomes for students. I mean, although we don't have jurisdiction over that, but certainly that's something that can be a highlight to people, you know, who want to go that route. That the schools are showing improvements in, you know, for the students.
So, for those who don't have immediate access to it, well, you basically just pretty much read it directly. Right?
Yeah, I did.
So, yeah, okay. I thought, well, that sounds really good. Let me see what they said, and it was right there. So that was increase accountability and transparency of the recently expanded Opportunity Scholarship Program to ensure all private schools receiving funding through this program are improving outcomes for students. And this has to deal, for example, with like a lack of accountability or testing requirements for the schools that are receiving the public dollars. I think that's the primary objection there. Okay. Any further thoughts on this one? Ms. Caulfield, do you have thoughts on this part of it?
Yeah, I just want to be careful as to not, I mean, I understand our goal is definitely to have everybody come back to wonderful Wake County,
Mhm.
right? That is going to be our goal. But I do not want to take away the opportunity for some kids that don't fit in that box. So I would like to be careful with that wording as to, I don't want to oppose those children having that opportunity if they need it. So I know that we disagree a little bit on that one, so I just, if there's a middle ground, I just don't want to oppose children having the opportunity if that is what works best for them.
So for example, you could see having financial assistance or a voucher, but having it means tested, so it'd only be available to students that like couldn't afford to go normally, as opposed to just anybody.
I don't know what kind of discriminatory lines there are there.
Okay. But some sort of, Ms. Johnson?
Well, I'm fascinated that you use means testing as though we're going to have that happen, so I like your thinking.
Okay.
However, I was actually for me, I actually agree with Ms. Edmonds, largely because you do have options, but I don't personally believe we should use tax dollars to pay for private school. So that, for me, is the distinct difference. I don't disagree with parents having options. So I don't know if this is where you're going, but I think it was, Chair, that I'm more in tune to say we should be revisiting the income level, which is not discriminatory because that is actually where it started. The Opportunity Scholarships legislatively had a threshold for socioeconomic status to determine. Now, again, that's still not my middle ground, but for the sake of conversation, that's what I would say is at least should be on the table if we're going to discuss a middle ground, is moving back to a socioeconomic threshold.
And
Which is, again, was the original language.
Right. I just wonder, like, what about children who are in the middle ground? You know, I mean, parents.
Oh, I'm not
scraping
choosing the
by.
socioeconomics. I'm just saying that that would be my preference.
Right,
So I'm not putting a number there.
yeah. I'm not sure what we would ask of them, I mean, because there are some families that are somewhere in the middle there, and they couldn't necessarily afford to go to private, but they'll sacrifice something to get their kid to where it would work best for them, and it may be something that helps that child out, but they don't meet a limit that somebody's made up, you know what I mean? So there's a middle ground.
Mr. Hershey?
Well, so I would oppose a middle ground just because I am completely against vouchers. I don't want my tax dollars going to private schools at all. So I would be a no on trying to kind of be in the middle. I think we, as a representative of a public school board, that's my duty to advocate, and it's just me speaking about me. It's my duty to advocate for and only for public schools and to strengthen public schools. And I am not concerned with if people want to choose other means or other places to go, that is on them, and for them to figure out how to get there. That's not my responsibility as a public school board member. And I don't mean that to be offensive to anybody.
Oh, I agree with you.
Just, I don't want to be combative. I just am stating what I'm at.
And that's kind of why I was thinking that this language in the NCASA provides us a place where we can all kind of come together. Because I feel like there needs to be some kind of accountability for what they're doing as well as what we're doing, right? I mean, we are accountable as well
Right.
for our outcome. So we could certainly take a stand and say, they need to be accountable for their outcome as well.
Very good. Ms. Evans?
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Right now in North Carolina, we have zero accountability for private schools. Of all the states that use, that have private school vouchers, we have the least level of accountability. So I agree with, and I like the way that it's worded in that example with the NCASA. But I want to be bold here and say that, until public schools in North Carolina are fully funded, we have no business funding private religious schools with taxpayer money. So again, I don't have the wording today, but if you want me to have it ready for the retreat, I will.
Or let's say the 20th, that'll be before
Okay.
the retreat.
Yeah, but I wanted to have that item as a discussion
Yeah.
when we bring this back.
And I mean, and it's the board's agenda.
Right.
Right? And so there are currently 8 of us, by then hopefully 9 of us, and, we'll find where that is. And one thing to think about too, because different people will have different philosophies, and I don't know how each of you individually will view it. Some people see the legislative agenda as an important statement of principles, right? And these are the ideals that we are seeking, and this is what we back and where we stand, what we're willing to fight for. Other people see it as, kind of more pragmatic. What can we do in the realm of the possible, right? I think all of us might have our own pet peeve that we'd like to see the legislature resolve one way or the other, but we just know, given previous statements and actions, that it's hopeless. And so, we might try to put together a legislative agenda that, we think we can achieve. And so where that balance is just up to each of you individually. But when we come back together on the 20th, we'll need to have that conversation and sort of see, one, is there agreement about what type of document that we want to have? And if we can reach that agreement, great. And then we can try to fit everybody's individual language into that type of document. But fundamentally, if we're just in different places on what we think the document should be, then I just encourage you to advocate for what you believe. Ms. Johnson-Hassel?
One other follow-up, and not to the point you're making, I do think that's appropriately where we should be going. My question is, do we have the government affairs folks on our agenda for some time? Because even once we decide that, I do think if we find some way to say, we don't have a middle ground, but if you're doing this, then we want to see accountability put in place that they Because I also think our government affairs people are going to have some thoughts on language that is more palatable to their use for us.
That's a
So
great.
I'd rather us not spend all of our time, to your point, of wordsmithing, when I think it's far more beneficial for our work with them, for them to say, thank you for the core concept, thank you for whittling it down, here's what we really think. And that's more palatable based
Okay.
on
Yeah.
what we
I
can
agree.
agree
I just
to.
want to make sure I've got my assignments
Yes.
written down.
I-
If I have an assignment.
This is for my memory, so that we
Yeah.
don't spend our time wordsmithing
Yeah, no,
when
no,
they
no.
may come in and say, actually, use
There-
these
yeah.
words.
So in that case, then what we can do is we can just sort of come in on the 20th and just sort of decide, again, not to the specific wording, but, how far we think we want to go on it, subject to input from the government relations team. And then we will let input from them form the actual wording that we put in the document.
Yeah, I certainly think there are things that we're clear on, but things like this where we definitely may have different ideology, I think that's where, and again, when you and I talked to them, that was what was important to us, is that they would be able to, regardless of ideology, help us figure out what's more beneficial for us in terms of how we advocate for what this board agrees to.
So we have an informed decision based on all the available information. Dr.
I was
Taylor?
going to say that I'll give you, we can go back and tweak the retreat agenda if we need to devote more time to this section with the lobbyists, so they can not only talk about tweaking the priorities, but those other things that you just addressed. We can just adjust times and make sure it's there.
Okay. Well, and again, I don't want us to prolong the discussion so far that the bill deadlines and things have already passed, but it sounds like maybe let's plan to take this off the February 20th action agenda. We'll still come back and look at it in work session, then have it at the retreat, and then bring something back on the 20th? Or
Oh, I'm recommending that we keep it
We
on
keep
our
it on
action
action.
agenda.
Okay.
I just want them to say, here's what it should say when you give us your beautiful document.
Okay. Okay. Dr. A?
And this is just kind of hopefully tied two things together.
Yeah.
I think if you look at a lot of people who are looking for other options in education, I think a lot of them are the kids with special needs. And so what are we doing for those kids with special needs here in the public school system? Are we meeting their needs? If they're not, if we're not, then they're moving elsewhere. And that's where the money is going to. So how can we do a better job here? So, for what it's worth.
We addressed that by saying we need more money, but because I 100% agree with you, no disagreement there. And again, and I can't speak for Ms. Evans, but that's a large part of my concern is the real investment should be what we're saying to you that we're struggling with. And it's not just Wake County, right? Like, as you see, these are issues that regardless of the size of the district are saying, the needs that we have to meet today are not the needs of 30 years ago, which is when some of those funding levels were set much
That's
longer
right.
than that.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, yes, I don't think you'll talk to a school district in this country. Your friend is over Spec Ed in Miami-Dade. No one is figuring out how to do this right because this isn't the day of 30 to 40 years ago of what they're seeing in terms of what our students' needs are. And I don't think any of us have really figured out how to, and my colleagues I've talked to across the country, have figured out how to really articulate that, because I think people are afraid to say, we are not dealing with what you saw in your school. We're no longer putting all of our students in one class and leaving them all there all day. We're committed to ensuring that we're able to actually figure out what the appropriate diagnosis and educational plan for each student is, and those services, accommodations that are needed. And I just think people find it difficult to say that, so we just keep saying, we just need more money for Spec Ed. I think we actually have to really, truly put the fine point on why schools are not able to meet the needs of those students, and why we're not going to be able to meet it if we don't say, this is why we're asking you for the funding. And again, I don't believe you can ask people for money without drawing a picture, right? I think it is our job to illustrate why this is important, and I think, again, what I've heard is people just say we need the money without articulating that this is not school that I went to 30 years ago. So it's certainly, and they're older than me, so it's certainly not the school they went to.
Right.
And I think that's a hard thing for people to say, but it's the truth.
So let's talk about that just a little more, because in terms of like what we put in a document, I want to make sure I explore this fuller. So, one of the things, if we had more money, would be making sure the money is used to make a difference and produce a different outcome. So is it that we need differentiated funding so that we have adequate funding to address the more severe needs, but then do we get flexibility for each district to sort of devise their plan, or is it something very specific or direct that the money would be used for? As I've talked to special education teachers, I haven't gotten a lot of solutions, but I hear a lot of challenges, the amount of paperwork that they have to fill out. Some possible solutions for that seem to be restricted. You can't just hire an administrative person to help them with that because all of the reports and paperwork have to be filled out by the teacher who's actually delivering the instruction. So where are some others? I know Mr. Swanson had a work conflict, but I know he'd had some very specific ideas about, possible ways we could provide, more assistance through special education instructional assistance, or maybe helping with those ratios. And I just don't know how far we want to go. To your point, I think more money by itself isn't an answer,
Structure.
but
Well, I also am not the educator at this table, so I don't think that's an hour conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like, I really think we should be saying, hey, Dr. Taylor, Ms. McKenna should be saying to us, here are our needs. I mean, certainly most of us have platform on special
Yeah.
education, and for me, paperwork and training were the top two lists. But again, that's from the outside looking in. There's no way an educator's telling me everything they need, right? I really think that that's our district's role to articulate to us and to our government relations of, here's how you paint this picture, because it's not just severity, it's also number of students. So making sure that we're coupling those. But yes, for me, the top two things were the level of administrative burden that's necessary, but also structurally, right? Like, so some of our schools have the capacity to push in services to our students who we can put in regular class. Some of our schools don't, so they still just don't mainstream any students, right? Like the discrepancy just in terms of what we see in our schools, because they are just different and distinct needs. So I think that's my personal opinion, is Jill McKenna and her shop can further articulate that for us. But I also think that for me is, we don't want to lose the thread that, again, this isn't about us not being accountable, this is about student outcomes for all students.
all right, so Dr. Taylor, if you heard that, I think we're assigning you some homework.
Mastery, man.
He wrote out his homework too.
Come back on the 20th and give us an idea from staff on how we can take this issue. Again, I think we do address the funding needs, the differentiation, as we've already talked about, but give us also a next step in terms of what will provide the most good.
There's one thing I do want to mention to the board. You have it on your legislative priorities in terms of reinstate advanced degree pay. But we had a discussion yesterday, I think it was yesterday, that we pay the master's pay for anyone that was not captured in the state's dividing line. Now, the problem with that is that as we move forward, we have more people who will not be funded by the state, and then we will end up taking on a higher price tag of those people that qualify that the state is not paying that we pay. So the numbers are going to go like this. And so at some point, you will be paying 100% of advanced degrees, and they won't be paying anything. That never really occurred to us until we had that conversation. So just something you may want to lift that up at a higher document, but just wanted to share that.
All right, Ms. Caulfield, you have one last one.
I have one last one, and also it could either be a big one or it could be the wrong place. I don't know. We'll find out. But one of the things that we see everywhere is the growth. And we have these developers, big developers that are coming in, and they are putting property after property, apartment after apartment, high density everywhere, and they're putting all of this in our communities, which requires more resources. Not only do you need EMS and firefighters and police, you also need school space. So I've actually brought this up to talk about it with the towns, of the developers actually supplying money towards our schools. They're putting the people there, and they're putting it in like a greater need. So can they put more money towards the schools? And we've been told that it's more at a state level. So I'm wondering, since we are the schools,
Yeah.
and we are the ones who are feeling it, if there's a way to ask them, and I've already sent an email, but I'm thinking since we're doing legislative
Yeah.
agenda, is it something that we could ask for support to do something more in that path that we, is there something that was supposedly changed somewhere along the line
Yeah.
that took that power away
So-
for towns to do that?
So, and I'm going to look to our attorney, Rod Malone, and try to jog his historical knowledge. I believe in North Carolina, municipalities and local governments had the ability to charge impact fees.
Right.
And they could use that money toward different infrastructure improvements. So for example, growth in an area might, a municipality could assess whatever sort of fee or levy, and then say that is to, being used to extend water, to extend services.
Right.
But then, I believe in Wake County, Cary had tried to do that when Glenn Lang was mayor for schools or for education. And then the legislature came in and said that, not just Wake County, but I think nobody could do that anymore unless they were already doing it, or what, do you know what happened with impact fees?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now. So I know there was Wake-specific legislation that
Yeah.
prevented lots of those kind of fees from being imposed on school projects. And then, as it relates to school impacts, there was some litigation that dealt with it, I think out of Durham or maybe somewhere else. But there was some litigation that kind of resulted in a similar response that municipalities could not impose those kinds of requirements for schools. Municipalities have found other creative ways to try to work around that. But yeah, there is a problem for the most part within the law in municipalities imposing fees on developers to offset the cost of schools.
Okay. Is that something that for the 20th, you or someone at your firm could bring us just a little clarification on? If it's a
Yes.
statute, it's one thing, but then if there was a judicial, if there was a case and maybe a
Sure.
constitutional issue, it'd be a little bit more ambitious for us to fix.
Yeah, so I can definitely pull the Wake statute. I know it's permit fees and I think it's like impact fees there, but then we can also pull the law. There's some cases out of, I think mostly out of Durham, but yeah, we can provide a summary of that for the next board meeting. Yeah, sure.
Does that sound good, Ms. Caulfield?
Yeah, thank
Can I give
you.
you some more background
Yeah.
and sort of what your options are for
Yeah.
what you might like to look at? Ms. Evans?
So along those lines, I agree with you completely. We also need a statewide school bond, and we haven't had one since the 90s. I tried to look it up, I'm seeing 1996, don't quote me on that, but it's been years. And there was momentum to have one, a statewide school bond that would be on the ballot, like in 2012, 2014, some time ago, with the current legislative leadership, like during their tenure, but it's been several years, and they won't put it on the ballot. So I would be in favor of, along your lines is supporting a statewide school bond going before the voters. And that wouldn't just benefit us, but it would benefit, other
Well,
districts.
With all due respect, I don't think it would benefit us.
I understand
at
what you're
all.
saying.
Yeah.
But I think it is a worthy,
We've talked about this issue in the past, and it's been something that generally, when the issue has come up through the North Carolina School Boards Association, we've generally, supported it, knowing that whatever funding formula they come up with for the bond funds, they're going to prioritize the lowest tier counties.
yes, I
And so
understand
Wake
that.
County, won't see a dime of it.
I understand.
But it's been, to be good public education supporters and teammates, we've gone along with it.
Is it true we would not see a dime of it?
I believe it's true, we would not see a dime of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the last time they did a state one, I think everybody got something.
Everybody.
I think so. That's my memory.
I was looking at like the lottery funding formula.
So the
and things like that.
lottery grants, those are not likely to,
Right.
for Durham and,
So
Wake
three
and
things
Charlotte.
with that statewide school fund, you would benefit. Lottery funds, everybody gets their prorated share. The county commissioners can determine how it's used. The facility grants, those do go to tier 1 and tier 2 schools. So it's roughly $500 to $600 million a year. Wake County would not benefit. So there's about, I don't know, about maybe 12 to 15 counties that don't qualify under the current one. But if they did do a statewide one, if it was as it was back in whatever time frame that is, every county would benefit. So I think the closest we came was maybe 2019 or 2020. They were considering it, but something in the GA fell out and it didn't happen. But statewide, we would benefit, but not the facilities grant.
And I think that year when they didn't do that, they changed the lottery grant to raise the amount
I was trying to
and to
remember
make it more favorable for that category.
Okay.
Right, but again, that's not going to help
It'd be
Wayne.
in tandem with
Yeah, it's not going to help.
Right.
what I'm suggesting, not instead of.
Right, so I think I was going for like the development because it's a direct impact with what they're putting right there. It's a more, fine-tuned, point on it, where the state, for everybody, it seems like that kind of will trickle down to, is it really going to help us?
Okay.
So that's,
Well, if there's support
That
for it, I mean, let's bring it and we can talk about it.
I do support it, but I just, my only concern is careful what we wish for, because in some, I know that in the past, the concerns that I've heard about impact fees where developers give money to schools is they then feel that they have ownership of that school and say in what students get assigned to that school. You get into that.
Yeah, that's been an issue even here.
That's what I was looking
at.
You guys accepted some money for school some time ago. I forget exactly how it played out. I think the money flowed through Cary, and then we actually ended up in litigation over, the ability for that school to be your school, not his school. So yeah, that is another issue that we have run into just in general when money flows in like that.
And I think, from what we've seen just historically, there would be really strong opposition to it from a lot of people in the building community, the real estate community. I know in terms of looking at like housing costs and housing prices, that's something that, they'll say will help contribute to the rising cost of house prices because they're just going to pass whatever fees on to any homeowners. And so there's a lot of pros and cons just to weigh, but we'll bring it, we'll get the information, and then we'll be able to kind of explore it more at the next meeting and sort of see what's going on with that. And then just similarly, even though it's, well, I won't debate the school bond, but I'll just say we'll bring it back at the next one. I just fear sometimes people use the lottery or school bonds as an excuse and say, well, we just gave you this many $1 million for education, even though the bond is for school construction, not for teachers or teacher salaries. But then sometimes people use that as sort of like an opt-out for their other funding responsibilities. So I'm just a little old and jaded on that one, but I mean,
They're already opting out of their.
they're already opting out anyway. so
I'm actually like you, I'm like,
So-
at this point.
Yeah.
Might as well put it on there. Okay. All right. So we've gotten a couple good suggestions for some additions and some requests for clarification or more specificity on some of our existing items. And then it sounds like we also then have a plan for how we'll develop this. We'll have more development of the agenda at our February 20th work session with the goal of bringing the draft to our government affairs team at the retreat, and then get their advice and their input before we finalize the agenda. Does that sound agreed? Have I missed anything? Is there anything that I got wrong with that? Dr. Taylor, do you have? Okay.
And I think as the chair said, if any ideas that you have in the interim, just be sure to let us know so we can massage it with the lobbyists. I think we'll be good.
All right. I appreciate it. Well, then, if there is no further discussion on that item, we'll go to our last item on the work session agenda, which is an update on the District 4 vacancy process. So, our deadline for application to fill the District 4 vacancy has passed, but we need your input on how to proceed before we know exactly how many applicants that we have. I'll give you a few facts, and then I want to open it up for discussion. Okay? The District 4 vacancy ad that we all reviewed ran in the News and Observer on Sunday, January 14th. There was a digital ad as well. We publicized everything about where to apply. It was on our WCPSS website. The deadline, as we set, was 5 p.m. on February 2nd. We discovered an email glitch on February 1st where some of the emails were not coming through, and the emails were being sent to quarantine. This is just for security purposes. But staff had the D4 vacancy email box monitored from that point forward through February 2nd. So the applications did start arriving. A total of 7 applicants applied. However, not everyone submitted the information as requested. So, for example, one applicant who applied had all the documentation except for a utility bill. The applicant shared that they regretted to inform us that they are currently unable to provide a utility bill as additional proof of domicile. If you remember, in the advertisement, we said if you could not provide a utility bill, to please contact us and we would give you options for alternative proof of residence. So they requested guidance on alternative mail. Staff reached out. We contacted the board attorney to receive guidance from, I believe Mr. Malone and his team contacted the State Board of Elections.
Went on their website.
Or the Wake County.
Yeah, went on their website.
And then looked for other documents that are used to demonstrate domicile.
Correct.
And so the applicant was then told that the documents had to be current, had to show the individual's name and address, and then we provided the following options: utility bill, bank statement or bank-issued credit card statement, government paycheck, invoice letter, or other document from a local, state, or U.S. government agency, property tax bill, automotive registration, public housing, or social service agency document. Paycheck or paycheck stub from an employer or W-2 statement. And so that list was provided. The applicant responded before the deadline, providing a current W-2 statement. So basically, the question is, they didn't have the utility bill. We said they could provide an alternate form of domicile. We got a list of alternate documents they could provide, and that's what they provided. Are there any concerns about that document being used to establish domicile? Dr.
Oh, I do have concern about it because, as a matter of fact, my W-2 from here had my old address on it. And so they forwarded to my new address, but it still was the old address. So I don't know if that is truly accurate.
Okay. Does anyone else share those concerns?
I would support that.
Okay. So then the next question would be, do we give the applicant an opportunity to cure that by providing additional documents, or is the application invalid?
I don't mind giving them 24 hours. We're not going to make a decision in 24 hours, but I'm also happy to, if the board doesn't want to do that, I'm fine with that too.
I feel like if we're just deciding that now, we should give them the 24 hours to provide a pay stub or something that's more updated.
Especially since it came from the state board website.
Right, that would be my thought. I mean, not that you asked me, but I mean, they did comply within time. We gave them a list of things. They got you one of those things. It would seem that you would at least give them some time to give you something else off the list. So we actually, just so you know, we did not include everything that was on the state board's website. We did get rid of some that just seemed to us not to be that great. But yeah, hearing that discussion, I mean, I can certainly see why maybe that's not the best one.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so then I'm taking as the will and our direction to staff will be to reach out to the applicant and have them provide perhaps multiple documents that they could use alternatively that would help establish domicile from that list.
So if we're doing this, do you want to review the list again? And if there's something else on the list that the board's not going to be comfortable with, maybe to identify that now so that we don't end up in the same situation?
So this is what we have listed. We have utility bill, which could be, before we'd limited it, I think, to power and water. But here we also have telephone, mobile phone, electric or gas, cable television, water, or water and sewage. All right, I'm just going to read the list, and then if anyone has an objection to one, let me know. Bank statement or bank-issued credit card statement. Government paycheck, invoice, letter, or any other document from a local, state, or U.S. government agency. Property tax bill. Automotive registration. Public housing or social service agency document. And then we had paycheck or paycheck stub from an employer. And when we say current, we're basically saying, within the last 30 days. Okay?
Go ahead.
Same thing with the W-2 situation. Tax bill could be from,
That's what I was going to say.
yeah. So I'm not sure. I think it really needs to be something that was like exercised within, like a utility bill is something you're actually using. Pay stubs
No, this is, all these are.
actually have real
It
purpose.
was a really short.
Yeah, it could. That's what I was thinking.
But the thought is that if you have multiple items that are all within the last 30 days, whereas your driver's license, you might not have updated that, or definitely your voter ID card, some things, it's hard to find like one document that says where you are right now. They just don't exist. So the best I think we can do is try to triangulate. If you've got ones like the tax bill that we think those tend to be older, then we can eliminate that from the list. Is that
Yeah.
okay? All right, so we'll take the tax bill off. All right, but are people fine with the remaining documents? All right. All right, and I believe staff understands what those options are. Okay.
And not to make this more complicated, but 24 hours is close of business tomorrow, is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah. So then, this is the other one that we needed to get guidance on. There was another applicant who applied, provided 2 letters of recommendation, their resume. Oops, is that the one? Yeah, two letters of recommendation, the resume, and a letter of interest at 4:59 p.m. on Friday, February 2nd. The applicant also sent a second email on Friday, February the 2nd at 5:17 p.m., which would be 17 minutes after the deadline, that contained the utility bill and the voter registration for the domicile verification. So staff contacted the applicant on the received document and the time of these received documents. So here we have some materials that were submitted before the deadline, some materials that were submitted after the deadline, and then one of the things, a third letter of recommendation that was not submitted. So what do you want to do with this, the status of this applicant?
I am fine allowing it and showing a little compassion. 20 minutes, and we'll be able to evaluate it and ask appropriate questions. But again, if the board feels opposite, I'm not going to argue vehemently one way or the other.
That's a hard one, because if this were a typical filing period, if someone were trying to run for the seat or running for the seat in an election matter, people file at the last minute all the time, so it's not crazy that this occurred. So, I'm fine with letting it through. So everything, I understand the 20-minute, and I understand the split, and I also you're saying that only one thing of all the required was missing, and that was a third letter of recommendation, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Now, I'm fine with proceeding, letting them stay on the list.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, so then, just for clarification, it sounds like that we'll accept the late documents, we'll keep the applicant in the applicant pool. Do we want to allow the applicant to provide the third letter of recommendation, or no?
No. They haven't sent it in.
No.
No, they don't get to do that.
Okay, so we'll just review the materials that were sent on the 2nd, and we will include the materials that arrived after the deadline.
Yes.
It does seem like at 4:59, they were trying to get stuff over to meet the deadline, and then
Barely.
just the other backup documentation, but to not submit it and then do it later.
You can see a clear difference there.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we'll request the additional documentation from the candidate in terms of domicile. And again, all of those documents were submitted well before the deadline. So at this point, we need to plan our meeting on the 13th. So do we want to go forward contemplating that we will have all 7 candidates?
Yes. Get out early, get out early. Sorry.
Is our practice that we don't get these materials and review them and decide who we want to interview?
So there are different practices,
Okay.
and let me say this. Right now, all of the materials are being held by staff. The reason the materials have not been shared yet is that I wanted to make sure that we can make a decision on which applicants to accept or any applicants to reject without any bias about who those candidates might be. And I hope you all think
Sure.
that's a fair.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
So once we decide if we're going forward with the applicants, 6 or 7, then we'll release the names, and you all will get the names and the addresses of the candidates. Now, different practice over how to proceed next, as practices have varied over the course of the district. There have been times when we've received many applicants, and we've reviewed them all and then pared them down to a list of finalists. And then there's been other times where we've reviewed everyone. So if we had all 7 candidates, working with Melissa, we've developed like 3 options for a tentative schedule that would interview all 7. But if you all do not want to interview all 7, then we would need to come up with a way to pare the number down and do so in time that we could still notify the candidates who would be invited for an interview before this time next week.
Can't we review the candidates first before making that decision? Because
We could, but
but
what's your deadline for review, and then how do we get back as a board? Do you want to have another board meeting this week?
No, but, if there's 3 people that we might look at and say, for whatever reason, that we don't really want to interview them, are we going to spend 3 hours interviewing them?
Well, each candidate would only, yeah, right. What we've looked at are 3 different scenarios where each candidate would have, in one scenario, 35 minutes, and the other scenario is 45 minutes.
I don't even know what questions we're asking though either, so that's kind of makes it, I'm kind of operating in the blind to answer this question.
Okay, well, we can talk about that,
Yeah, I
because
don't
we've
think-
talked about some previous questions and had those available.
I mean, the questions, or for me, the answer is going to be the same regardless of the questions,
Yeah.
but this is your first time, so I see your point there. And clearly, I'd like to say I think it's going to be 30 minutes, but I don't think so. So just to be clear, 7 people times 45 minutes is probably what I would say people should be thinking. I mean, again, if we're given the 24 hours, I think it's hard to say what it is. I think, Rod can tell us how he'd like us to deliberate once we see all the information to make a decision, because I do agree, I don't necessarily want another board meeting, but I also want people to weigh in, having known, yes, this person responded, or no, they didn't, before deciding.
Well, the only way to narrow the list is at a board meeting. I mean, you can't narrow the list outside of a board meeting.
Okay. Right, I know that.
I mean, you can recess this meeting today and reconvene tomorrow, and narrow the list, or you can notice the meeting for Thursday or Friday, or you can recess it to Thursday or Friday, too. I mean, the only thing, you just got the 48-hour issue, so you would recess it if it's going to be less than 48 hours. You could, just notice a regular meeting, more than 48 hours.
I will say the practice for the last 2 District 4 vacancies and for the last District 7 vacancy were just to interview all of the candidates.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
We did.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, what are you going to ask? You want us to wait until close the business tomorrow before we issue all 7 names? Because now if that person doesn't do whatever within the 24 hours, then it'll only be 6. So do you want us to wait or send you all 7 now? No.
What do you all think?
I would prefer to see it as soon as we can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not going to hold it. I mean, obviously, we're allowing that person to correct. I'm holding nothing against them. So I'm fine with it. Doesn't,
But you would note in the releasing which one is, well, I guess it'll be clear which one is
Right.
missing. Yeah, so yeah, 'cause you'll get the backup material, so it'll be obvious which one is missing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you guys. You guys are mumbling.
I am totally mumbling. I'm sorry.
You definitely are, because I can
Yeah.
And especially if we turn this way,
I know.
And I can't hear you.
I can't hear right there
I
when
didn't
people
see
talk.
that.
Correct, I got this thing over here blowing at me, so.
Not even-
So what I had asked was, since that 7th person has to resubmit, did they want us to give them the names ahead of time or wait till that person did it? That's what
Thank you
I'm
for the
asking.
clarification.
I would like those names sooner than later.
So are we just saying names, or are you saying the
Oh.
application packet? There is a difference.
That's a really good point.
There is a very
They could be anonymous.
There is a difference.
I didn't think about that.
Well, but if you're trying to move
Yeah.
forward, you need the materials.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just want clarification.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect.
All right.
Some materials with it.
So then, just to be clear then, if we request the additional documentation of domicile, do we just simply treat the applicant as a candidate and then we'll judge their suitability based on receiving that document, but they're still considered an applicant?
Yeah.
Rather than trying to set the schedule based on what we do?
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, we'll go forward, we will provide all of the information to all of our board members, and then as providing it to the board members, it'll become public.
Right.
And everyone will have that.
Right.
And then we'll go ahead and set a meeting schedule for 7 interviews.
At 45 minutes each?
Well, let's talk about that.
Oh, okay.
Now you.
So can I just
Yeah.
want to make sure I'm following.
Yeah,
So if the person does not submit any additional documentation, then they're not a candidate.
well, that's my question for the board. Do they still interview and you weigh that as a criteria against their suitability as a candidate, or do you just deny them an interview?
Well, but I mean, I think a threshold question is whether they can take the seat. So, I mean, I don't
Yeah.
think, it seems
Well-
like we have to make that decision before we.
Well, so the way I was seeing it was based on the information that you got from the Wake County Board of Elections. They would be,
Okay.
they would be able to take the seat, but it was just a matter of our comfort level that some board members wanted additional assurance about domicile.
If that's what you are concluding, then that's not quite what I heard, but if
Okay.
that's what you're concluding, then that's fine. Then-
Well, I'm open to other
Well,
interpretations.
no,
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting otherwise,
Yeah.
but that's fine. If you're saying that,
Well, let's do a straw poll, because we won't know until we get that document, and then do we come together again to determine that the document is sufficient or not sufficient? Or do we just allow them to submit the document and then judge it upon its arrival?
So I think that's the 2 things, that if they don't submit the document, then they're eliminated. If they do submit the document, then you have to determine whether or not you find it acceptable. I guess that's it.
right, if they submit another document, right.
Yeah.
Right, because if you're accepting the document, then we're done, right? I mean, so it's either the W-2, in my mind, it's not it's acceptable, but we want something else. So, and it's a reasonable thing to say that what we said we wanted was X. Now, I mean, the problem is that we did give them the W-2 as an option.
Right.
Yes.
So I do see saying, well, we've decided that we want something else. Seems like a reasonable thing to decide, but it also, I mean, again, I understand exactly what people are saying about the W-2.
Sam?
I think they should be a candidate no matter what, and then if they choose not to submit anything else, we'll be aware of that, and that can, if someone wants to factor that into their decision-making. But given that we provided them a list and they met the criteria for that list, I think it's kind of, you know, they're a candidate, and we'll see what their actions are.
Why would we not eliminate them if they don't submit something else, a second?
Well, I don't know, I can't
Okay.
know what their own situation is. All I know is that they provided something on a list that we gave them. And so
Right.
if we go back and say, well, we asked, but,
Okay.
then I don't know that we're being really fair to that person.
Okay.
And maybe they have something to explain or would like to explain, and I'm operating without knowing anything. So I'd rather give them that opportunity than take it away after we've already given them a list.
But the point is that they meet criteria, right? So not to argue, but I'm just saying, why would we take it to the next level of interview just because we can't meet before then if they don't actually even meet the criteria?
Because they met criteria that we gave them already.
Yeah, I mean, so, and I will reach out to we have an elections, you know Adam Mitchell, we have an election, he does our elections law stuff. He gave me the list. We did take some things off that were, in our mind, not quite as clear, but, you know, the W-2 within the last 30 days seemed like a reasonable one, but that's a very good point that's been raised here today. And I guess the question for me to go back to Adam is, would the Board of Elections accept it as he understands the rules? And if they would, then, I mean, it's not necessarily your job to make absolutely sure. I mean, it's really more of the Board of Elections issue anyway.
I mean, I remember during the campaign process, there were people that were literally moving, and it was an uproar. And that's what I'm thinking is, the point is that they are currently the resident.
Correct.
And we don't come into that situation again. So I would think they would have to provide that. I know you're saying it's not a legality, right?
Well, no, I guess what it is that we want to make sure that they can show domicile. And so we use the documents that are typically used, except there's utility bills. And there's a lot of valid reasons someone may not have a utility bill. For example, in my house, the electric bill is in my wife's name. So if I tried to use it for my residency, it wouldn't have my name on it, right? But we asked council, what would alternative documentation be? These were ones that were taken off the Board of Elections website. But, you know, when we reviewed it as a board, you know, you said, well, maybe that's the best, maybe that's not the best. So I think, and I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, from Mr. Hershey's perspective, you set a standard, you gave someone the instructions on what to do if they could not meet the standard. We gave them a list, they provided what was on the list, and now we're saying what was on the list we gave them isn't good enough. So it's not fair to the applicant. But then I also hear what, you know, is saying over here, that you've seen situations where one of the documents could have information that may not be may not be current. And so to try to balance both of those important perspectives, what is fair to the applicant while also providing assurances to us and to the public of the accuracy of the residents, it sounds like we would like some more materials provided. And so then the question is, if we're going to make this request for additional materials, just to help verify the accuracy of domicile, is it an invitation to provide more, which we review and judge, and, you know, we decide during an interview process or after an interview whether they're qualified or unqualified? Or is it an automatic test where at some point we would have to judge if the additional material, we'd have to meet, review, and judge where those additional materials still satisfied that? And then at that point, you're giving somebody a list, they're providing something, you don't like it, you give them additional items, they provide it, if they do provide it, and then you're saying it's still not good enough. I think at that point, rather than the application process, it really should be more of like, just, I've viewed it and I don't believe the person is qualified versus you're just kicked out of the application pool. Because if we give them 2 opportunities, they provide things that we've asked for, right? Then they're doing everything we've asked. And you just kind of have to weigh on your own whether it satisfies what you think proves, with the requirements for domicile. Mr. Hershey?
And didn't we already say that some of the other items on the list, car registration, I mean, we see people who move here and have license plates, I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
all of a sudden, we're giving them a list where we can turn around and say, well, but maybe not, so.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a perfect, outside of a
Yeah.
utility bill maybe, so I'm just fine interviewing them and, we can be the judge of what they submit additionally. And we can have that conversation as a board at that time, I think, which I think is an appropriate conversation.
I'm fine with that.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
If
Because
they have a
again,
W-2, they should be able to have a pay stub, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
one gets you the
one
other
usually
one.
gets you the other.
Yeah.
And again,
Oh, no, that's what I
It's-
said.
I want to be clear, it is a burden on the people that are applying, but just for public service, with the doubts, with
It
things
is a
we've
burden.
experienced in the past,
Yeah, sure.
Just is.
we're, we're asking them to do this, to pursue this opportunity, so.
Well, and I think we can rest in, I said it quietly, but I think it is true. I mean, public servant is a sacrifice that you're making to do this, and so, but it is also not the regular process that we use, so I support being open to facilitating it, but I do think the burden of proof is necessary, given this person also has the ability to run for this seat this year, because that seat is of this year. And so, for me, I think that I don't think we should beat ourselves up for both being lenient and granting grace to human beings, because that, for me, that's important. But also, I think we also can't ignore the fact that it is appropriate to say that doing this is a personal sacrifice. And
I agree.
Okay. So then I hear we'll
both things are
invite,
true.
we've got the both and.
Both and.
I live by it.
We
One out of
will,
the tattoo.
so what I'm hearing is some consensus that we'll invite all 7 candidates to interview, but we will make the request for the one candidate to provide just additional documentation.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so then, your fabulous board administrator has worked hard to come up with 3 scenarios for interviews of 7 candidates. And I wanted to share those with you to see if we can come to some agreement on what works best. There's one that has a shorter than contemplated interview time, 35 minutes per candidate, but it would start at noon on Tuesday the 13th, and then should end by about 5:05 on the 13th. The other 2 options give the full 45 minutes. They simply just shift the start and end times. One would begin at 12:30 on Tuesday the 13th and end at 7:15 the same day. The other one would start half an hour earlier. It would start at noon and end by 6:45. So those are your 3 options. Does anyone have a preference? Mr. Hershey?
In your experience, how long are the questions?
It didn't matter. We gave
Okay.
people a time frame, right? Similar to interviewing the superintendent. We had like 20-part questions, but they're,
That's what I
but we
was-
still were
right.
in a tight time frame. So the questions haven't really been the issue, because we also put it in front of them so they can also see
Okay.
it. So the questions really haven't been the issue. It's really been making sure they actually stick to the time that they answer.
Okay. My concern was, when we did this with other process, we had one question that had 10 questions in it. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
That sort of
I
thing.
mean, all of our
Not making
questions,
sure we didn't
all of our
do that
questions
again.
at least have 2 parts, but they are
Okay.
definitely not as lengthy as our last process.
Good, okay, that's fine.
But
question?
you would think educators, we would
So I
struggle.
think we had-
I'm not an educator. so
We had one for everybody, so if there might have been 10 questions, but then if there's 8 of us interviewing, everybody asked a question. And
Yeah,
then
that's what
if
we did.
we ended up earlier, then we give that throwaway. What else would you like to say, or is there anything we should have asked, just to let them
Close out.
close out?
I will personally defer to you've done this too, right? So those that with the experience, I'm going to go with what you recommend, how it went last
Well, let me
time.
just say, we have not interviewed 7 people. So,
Do you think 35 minutes is sufficient? Can you get what you need out of 35 minutes?
I mean, if you were interviewing me, no, but maybe they will be more succinct.
10 on that.
I thought there were, I was thinking it was 8 or 10 questions.
And you all did get a Google link,
Yeah.
January 19th.
Oh,
Yeah.
I missed it. Okay, my bad.
Yes, Tyler let me know he put his feedback in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've referred to like the questions and emails and things that I've sent as well, so. So 12:30, so I guess the first question is, do you want 35 minutes or 45 minutes?
Apparently 45 minutes.
I mean, especially if we're asking 10 questions.
Yeah.
Again, we don't have to ask 10.
I think I'd rather err on the side of asking 10 questions and giving a little extra time, given the importance.
Okay, so
We're
let
talking
me
about-
ask you.
We're talking about 2 hours of time
Yeah.
difference in our lives.
Mhm.
And I think I can do
Okay.
that.
Does this include a break?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
It does.
I'm just saying, because there's just so much information you
Mhm.
can process
Yeah.
if you're going to do that many in a row.
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
okay with 45.
Okay. So like in each of those, where we have a 45-minute one, we would give ourselves like a 15-minute break in between to, like as you said, kind of process, compress, whatever other breaks we need. So would you rather start at 12:30 or 12 o'clock?
I would rather start at noon.
Same.
That's mine as well. All right. So then we will set the meeting for noon on February the 13th. And so then staff will begin contacting applicants on their interview times beginning tomorrow, Wednesday the 7th. Okay? Or sorry, Wednesday, we'll start, we'll contact them Wednesday, February the 7th. Their interviews are the 13th. All right, so as a reminder, we will select our candidate that day. So at the conclusion of the business, at the conclusion of all the interviews, we will have any discussion and a vote. The candidate themselves, whoever is selected by at least 5 board members, will be sworn in on February the 20th after our work session, before the board meeting. So then that member will be able to come, take their seat. We'll have a small reception to be held after the swearing in, before the board meeting starts. Okay? Ms. Evans?
What does that selection process look like? Is it written the way we vote on chair? Is it verbal? It's
I
an
don't-
open session, but I've watched it before, I've watched the interviews before, but I don't remember how the voting happened.
I can check, I don't know that the policy specifies a way.
It was a ballot.
It's actually a ballot.
Person's name.
Is that what
Each
it
applicant's
is?
name is on the ballot, and the board member signs
Just
the
like we
ballot,
do
just
for
like you
chair.
do the chair and
Okay.
vice chair.
And is it by policy, or is that just the way it was done last time?
Ooh, I don't know.
Policy has changed numerous times.
Okay.
It's how we've done it my 4 times that I've
Okay,
been to work.
okay.
Okay.
Well, there we go.
But then the ballots are public records
Right.
and are able to be inspected by.
Right.
Right.
So I think there was a discussion about what the minimum number is that they need to have. Is that?
Right, it was, still, let me clarify, while all 7 names are on the ballot, you still get a motion for certain people, and you vote for certain people, is that what they've done?
I would have to go back. I
Historically,
don't remember a motion, I remember by
No.
majority.
Yeah, that's,
It was by majority.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's.
I remember a distribution of ballots, and then collection of the ballots, and then a reading of the tally, at least for the last 2.
okay.
That's-
Well, the
they've all been
answer is
same.
5. The
Okay.
answer
It would
is,
be
it would
four.
require 5 people,
Yeah.
5 votes for the same person. I just, right, sometimes
Okay.
you would need a motion and a second to limit
That's a
the
good
group.
point.
But if you just are going to vote for everybody on the ballot, that's perfectly fine too, if that's your process.
Do we have open discussion about?
So it's
Yes.
interesting, we have an open discussion period. I don't remember like a lot of debate, but I do remember people maybe expressing why a candidate they liked appealed to them. Is that,
Yeah,
you've been
that's
through
good.
more of these than I have?
I mean, I agree, I wouldn't call it a debate, but everybody did express why it was their interest for one person or the other.
vote for one person? Or just one? Just one.
No weighted
know,
ballot.
just one.
No proportional.
Not your top three, just one.
Yeah.
So
To get to
that's
five.
the idea, that if you vote and one person, the most they get is 4 votes, then you got to go through a
It's
process.
just like we do chair and vice chair. You just keep voting until you get five.
Yeah.
And that's where I want to, I'll just check and see, I mean, because you may want to at some point require a motion and second to narrow the list so that people are, just with 7 people.
Okay.
But we can, I'll look into
You can let us know on the 13th, before the 13th, if possible. All right, then. Okay, so then, now that we've decided how to proceed with the applicants, then I don't believe there's any other reason not to know, so we can distribute those packets to everyone. All right. Okay, then. So, board members, we do have several items scheduled for closed session. We have completed our work session agenda. What I'd like to do with the time remaining is go ahead and go into closed session to try to advance through as many of those items as we can. So I do have here a handy
You do?
cheat sheet. I do.
Awesome.
If
Absolutely.
talented vice chair would be willing to
Well, I don't know
make the
about
motion.
Let's see. Mr. Chair, I move that we go into closed session to consider confidential personal information protected under GS 143-318.11A6 and 115C-319, to consider confidential student information protected under GS 115C-402 and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, 20 U.S.C. 123, actually that's 1232G, to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve attorney-client privilege to provided in GS 143-318.11A3 regarding use of social media, to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege in GS 143-318.11A3 due to current litigation for a due process matter, CP by and through TP and KP, Wake County Board of Education, 23 EVC 05329, in the Office of Administrative Hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Ms. Caulfield? All in favor of moving to closed session, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we are in closed session.